Turn the car around. Now, Officer Martinez shouted, his face drained of all color. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, spinning it hard to the right. The tires screeched against the asphalt, and my heart hammered so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. Seconds later, we saw my husband's body lying in the middle of the road. But he wasn't alone. I'm Sarah Chun, and 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. David and I had been together for 12 years, built a successful accounting firm together, owned a beautiful home in suburban Portland. We were trying for our first child. Life was normal, safe, predictable, until that Tuesday night when everything I believed about my husband crumbled in a single, horrifying moment. Before we begin, if you enjoy these real-life mysteries, please hit that subscribe button. What I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and the people I trusted most. It started with a phone call that came at 11:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the clock, wondering where David was. He'd left for what he called a client dinner at 6 p.m., promising to be home by 10. This wasn't unusual. David often worked late, especially during tax season. But something felt different that night. The caller didn't identify himself. Just said, "Your husband is in trouble. Highway 84, mile marker 23. Come alone, or people will get hurt." The line went dead. My first instinct was to call the police, but something in that voice, cold, calculated, threatening, made me hesitate. What if this was some kind of kidnapping? What if calling the authorities would make things worse? I grabbed my keys and drove into the night, my mind racing with possibilities. Highway 84 was a stretch of road David never took. It led away from the city, toward the mountains where abandoned warehouses and forgotten industrial sites dotted the landscape. As I drove, I called David's phone repeatedly. It went straight to voicemail every time. That familiar voice saying, "Hi, you've reached David Chun. Please leave a message," suddenly sounded foreign, like it belonged to a stranger. When I reached mile marker 23, I saw nothing but darkness. Empty roads stretching in both directions. No cars. No David. No anything. I sat there for 20 minutes, engine running, windows down, listening to the silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. Then headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A police cruiser pulled up behind me, and Officer Martinez stepped out. Middle-aged, weathered face, the kind of cop who'd seen too much. "Ma'am, you need to come with me," he said, his voice tight with something I couldn't identify. Fear. Urgency. "There's been an incident." "Where's my husband?" I asked, getting out of my car. "Someone called me, told me to come here. Get in the cruiser. Now." His tone left no room for argument. As we drove deeper into the mountains, Martinez kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. Finally, he spoke. "Mrs. Chun, what I'm about to show you, it's going to be difficult. But you need to see it. You need to understand what your husband was involved in." "Involved in what?" "David's an accountant. He helps people with their taxes." Martinez let out a bitter laugh. "Is that what you think he was doing tonight?" The road curved ahead, and that's when I saw the lights. Police cars, ambulances, crime scene tape fluttering in the wind like yellow ribbons. And in the center of it all, a cleared section of asphalt where something terrible had happened. That's when Martinez shouted those words that still echo in my mind. "Turn the car around. Now." But it was too late. I'd already seen it. David's body lay in the middle of the road, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. But what made my breath catch wasn't just seeing my husband dead. It was seeing who was lying next to him. Rebecca Morrison. My sister. The sister who'd been traveling in Europe for the past 6 months. The sister who'd stopped returning my calls, stopped coming to family dinners, stopped existing in our lives without explanation. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, and even in death, even with blood matted in her blonde hair, I could see the diamond necklace around her neck. The one David had claimed he'd bought for me last Christmas, but somehow never got around to giving me. They were together when it happened, Martinez said quietly, stepping up beside me as I stared at the scene. "Your sister and your husband. They've been meeting here every Tuesday night for months." My legs felt like they might give out. "That's impossible. Rebecca's in Paris. She's been sending me postcards." "Postmarked from Portland, Mrs. Chun." We checked. She's been living in her apartment downtown under a false name. Your husband was paying the rent. The world tilted sideways. All those late nights. All those client dinners. All those times David would come home smelling like perfume he claimed came from hugging grateful customers. How did they die? I heard myself ask. Martinez hesitated. That's what we're trying to figure out. No skid marks. No evidence of a vehicle collision. But look at this. He led me closer to the bodies, and I saw what he meant. David and Rebecca weren't just lying in the road, they were positioned. Arranged. David's hand was reaching toward Rebecca's, but not quite touching. Like someone had carefully placed them in a final, tragic tableau. Mrs. Chun, Martinez said, we found something else. In your husband's car, parked about a mile from here. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in David's messy scrawl. Sarah, if you're reading this, then Thomas Morrison knows what we discovered. The money laundering operation, the shell companies, the missing city funds. We have proof of everything. Rebecca found the files in his home office 3 days ago. We were going to turn them in tomorrow, but he must have found out. Rebecca is scared. I'm scared. If something happens to us, give this drive to Agent Patricia Wells at the FBI. Tell her about the Riverside Development Project. Tell her Thomas Morrison is not the respected city councilman everyone thinks he is. I'm sorry for lying to you about Rebecca. We didn't plan for this to happen, but we couldn't stop it. I love you, Sarah. Please find the truth. Thomas Morrison, Rebecca's husband, the man who'd been sending those fake postcards from Paris, making everyone believe his wife was living her dream abroad while she was actually hiding in Portland, gathering evidence against him. Your brother-in-law is a city councilman, Martinez said. He's been skimming money from municipal construction projects for years. Millions of dollars. Your sister discovered it, and instead of confronting him, she ran. Started an affair with your husband, who was helping her document the evidence. My mind reeled. So Thomas killed them? That's what we thought initially. But here's where it gets interesting. Martinez pulled out his phone and showed me a timestamp. Thomas Morrison was at a city council meeting until 11:30 p.m. tonight. 47 witnesses, including the mayor. There's no way he could have been here. Then who? Mrs. Chun, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Did you know about your husband's affair? The question hit me like a physical blow. Of course not. If I'd known. Because we found something else in David's car. Security camera footage from the apartment building where Rebecca was staying. Someone had been watching them, following them, taking pictures. He showed me grainy black and white images on his phone. David and Rebecca entering the building. David and Rebecca at a restaurant. David and Rebecca in what looked like an intimate embrace. And in the corner of several photos, barely visible, was the partial license plate of a familiar car. My car. Mrs. Chun, this footage was taken last week. Your vehicle was parked across from Rebecca's apartment building for over 3 hours on Tuesday afternoon. My mouth went dry. That's impossible. I was at work on Tuesday afternoon. I have a full schedule of client meetings. We'll need to verify that. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Had I been at work all afternoon? Tuesday was a blur of spreadsheets and phone calls, the kind of day that blended together with a dozen others. Could I prove where I was every minute? Martinez was watching my face carefully. Mrs. Chun, is there anyone who might have had access to your car? Anyone who might have known about David's Tuesday night meetings? And that's when it hit me. The cold, sickening realization that made everything else pale in comparison. My mother, I whispered. Elena Chun had been staying with us for 2 months, recovering from hip surgery. She'd been using my car to get to physical therapy appointments because David needed his for work. She had access to my keys, my schedule, my entire life. But more than that, she'd been acting strange lately. Asking odd questions about David's work, about Rebecca's absence from family dinners. I chalked it up to post-surgery confusion, maybe mild depression from being cooped up in the house. Where is your mother now, Mrs. Chun? I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed home. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. The house was dark when I'd left an hour ago. I'd assumed she was sleeping. She's not answering. Martinez was already walking back toward the patrol car. We need to go. Now. The drive back to my house felt like it took forever and no time at all. My mind kept replaying conversations with my mother, looking for signs I'd missed. The way she'd grown quiet whenever David's name came up. The way she'd asked pointed questions about Rebecca's European adventure. The way she'd insisted on doing the laundry, claiming she needed to stay busy, even though I'd offered to hire a cleaning service. Had she been going through David's clothes, looking for evidence of the affair? We pulled into my driveway, and I saw immediately that something was wrong. The front door was standing wide open, yellow light from the hallway spilling onto the porch. "Stay behind me," Martinez ordered, drawing his weapon. We found her in the kitchen, sitting calmly at the table with a cup of tea and a manila folder spread out before her. Bank statements, photos, receipts from hotels and restaurants. A complete dossier of David's affair, meticulously organized and dated. "Hello, Sarah," my mother said without looking up. Her voice was steady, almost serene. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." "Mom, what did you do?" She finally raised her eyes to meet mine, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Not confusion, or depression, or post-surgical fog. Cold, calculated satisfaction. I did what needed to be done. Your husband was a cheater and a thief. Your sister was a whore. They destroyed this family. So you killed them? Elena Chin smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. I didn't have to kill them, sweetheart. I just had to make sure they understood the consequences of their choices. She reached into the manila folder and pulled out a cell phone. Not hers, but one I'd never seen before. A burner phone. I've been tracking them for weeks, following them to their little love nest, documenting their meetings. Did you know they were planning to run away together? To take that stolen money and disappear to some tropical island? My legs gave out, and I collapsed into the chair across from her. "I called them tonight," she continued, her voice matter-of-fact. "Told them I had evidence that could destroy Thomas Morrison, but I needed to meet them in person. Somewhere private. Somewhere we wouldn't be interrupted. Highway 84, I whispered. They were so eager to get that evidence. So ready to play the hero and expose Thomas's crimes. They never suspected that someone else might want justice too. Martinez stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need you to put your hands where I can see them." "Of course, officer." Elena folded her hands on the table. "I'm not going anywhere. My work is done." "What did you do to them?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I gave them a choice. I showed them the photos, the evidence of their affair. I told them they could either end it, really end it, permanently, or I would send everything to you, to Thomas, to David's business partners, to everyone who mattered. I would destroy both of their lives piece by piece. But that doesn't explain. They chose to end it, Sarah. They chose to die rather than face the consequences of what they'd done. I simply provided the means." She opened the folder wider, and I saw what was inside. Not just photos and bank statements, but a small, empty medicine bottle. The label was torn off, but I recognized the pharmacy sticker. "Pentobarbital," Martinez said quietly, reading over my shoulder. "Where did you get this?" "My late husband was a veterinarian, remember? When he died last year, I kept some of his tools. For sentimental reasons." Elena looked at me with what might have been motherly concern. "They took it willingly, Sarah. I explained that it would be quick, painless, much better than living with the shame of what they'd done. They agreed it was the only way to protect the family honor." "You're lying." But even as I said it, I remembered David's note. "I'm scared. Not of Thomas Morrison. Of exposure. Of losing everything." "They drove themselves to that spot on Highway 84, Elena continued. "They took the pills together, like Romeo and Juliet. Very romantic, really. I just made sure their bodies were found in a way that would tell the right story." "What story?" Elena smiled again, that cold, satisfied expression. "The story of a cheating husband and his mistress who died in a tragic accident while trying to flee their crimes. Thomas Morrison will be investigated for the embezzlement. David's evidence will see to that. But you, my dear daughter, will be seen as the innocent victim. The grieving widow who discovered her husband's crimes and affairs only after his death." Martinez was already calling for backup, but I couldn't stop staring at my mother. This woman who'd raised me, who taught me right from wrong, who'd been living in my house for 2 months while planning the deaths of my husband and sister. "How long have you known?" I asked, About the affair? 3 weeks. About the money laundering? I figured that out last week, when I went through David's home office. Your husband was many things, Sarah, but he was not a careful criminal. She reached across the table and patted my hand, and I flinched at her touch. I did this for you, sweetheart, to save you from a life of humiliation and betrayal. Now you can start fresh. Find a good man. Someone who will respect you the way you deserve. More police cars were arriving outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the kitchen window, and I could hear Martinez giving orders over his radio. Mrs. Elena Chun, you're under arrest for the murders of David Chun and Rebecca Morrison. As they handcuffed her and read her rights, my mother kept talking to me over her shoulder. The life insurance policy will pay out, Sarah. David's share of the business is yours now. The house, the investments, everything. You're free. Free. The word echoed in my head as they led her away. I spent the rest of that night at the police station, giving statements, answering questions, trying to make sense of a world that had been turned completely upside down. Agent Patricia Wells from the FBI arrived at dawn to take possession of David's USB drive. She confirmed that the evidence against Thomas Morrison was solid. He'd be facing federal charges within days. But as the investigation deepened, more horrifying details emerged. The forensic team found traces of my mother's DNA on both David's and Rebecca's clothing. Security footage from a gas station 2 miles from Highway 84 showed my car, with Elena driving, at 10:15 p.m. that Tuesday night. She followed them, Detective Rodriguez explained to me 3 days later. Your mother had been tracking their Tuesday night meetings for weeks. She knew exactly where they'd be. The gas station footage was grainy, but clear enough to show Elena purchasing something from the store. The receipt, found in her purse, showed she bought bottled water and energy bars. Why would she need food? I asked. Because she planned to be there for hours. This wasn't a crime of passion, Mrs. Chun. This was premeditated, methodical murder. The forensic report that came back a week later haunts me most. The toxicology results show that David and Rebecca had indeed ingested lethal doses of pentobarbital, but they'd also found something else in their systems. Benzodiazepine, a powerful sedative that would have rendered them helpless within minutes. They were drugged first, Agent Wells explained, rendered unconscious or semi-conscious before the barbiturate was administered. This wasn't a suicide pact, Mrs. Chun. This was murder disguised as suicide. But the most chilling discovery came from David's phone records. The call that had summoned me to Highway 84, the anonymous voice telling me David was in trouble, hadn't come from a kidnapper or criminal. It had come from my mother's burner phone. She wanted you to find them, Detective Rodriguez said, showing me the phone records. She wanted you to see what your husband and sister had done, but she also wanted to make sure she had an alibi. While you were driving to the scene, she was driving back home, disposing of evidence. The timeline painted a horrifying picture. Elena had contacted David and Rebecca around 9 p.m., claiming to have urgent information about Thomas Morrison's criminal activities. She convinced them to meet her at Highway 84, promising to hand over evidence that would help them bring Thomas to justice. What she'd actually brought was a thermos of coffee laced with enough benzodiazepine to incapacitate 2 adults. Your mother is a former nurse, Agent Wells reminded me. She knew exactly how much sedative to use, how long it would take to work, and how to administer the final dose without leaving defensive wounds. The security footage from Rebecca's apartment building told an even darker story. Elena hadn't just been following them for 3 weeks, she'd been stalking them for over 2 months, learning their routines, their habits, their vulnerabilities. She knew Rebecca was afraid of her husband, Detective Rodriguez explained. She used that fear to manipulate both of them into trusting her. As the investigation continued, more pieces of Elena's plan came to light. She'd been forging the European postcards from Rebecca for months, mailing them from different locations around Portland to maintain the illusion that her daughter-in-law was traveling abroad. Your mother visited 6 different post offices. Agent Wells showed me a map marked with red dots. She never used the same location twice. She was covering her tracks from the beginning. My mother had lied about giving them a choice. She drugged them, forced the poison down their throats, and arranged their bodies to look like lovers who'd chosen death together. Elena Chun was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. She never showed remorse, never admitted that what she'd done was wrong. At her sentencing, She looked directly at me and said, "I would do it again. Family honor is everything." But the trial revealed even more disturbing details about my mother's mental state. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the court-appointed psychiatrist, testified that Elena exhibited signs of narcissistic personality disorder combined with what she called moral injury psychosis. Mrs. Chen believed she was the protector of family honor, Dr. Hernandez explained to the court. In her mind, she wasn't committing murder, she was performing a necessary cleansing ritual. The prosecution presented evidence that Elena had been planning David's death for weeks before she discovered Rebecca's involvement. Hidden in her bedroom, investigators found a notebook filled with detailed observations about David's behavior, his work schedule, his phone calls, even his eating habits. March 15th, David came home at 11:30 p.m. Clothes smell like perfume. Claims he was at office. March 22nd, found receipts in his wallet for restaurants Sarah doesn't know about. $180 for 2 people. April 2nd, David received text message at dinner. Smiled when he read it. Excused himself to bathroom for 15 minutes. The notebook contained over 40 entries, each one building Elena's case for what she would later call justified execution. But the most chilling entry was dated just 3 days before the murders. Sarah deserves better than this. David has brought shame to our family. Rebecca has chosen her path. Tomorrow I end this dishonor. During the trial, more family secrets emerged. Elena's sister, Maria, testified that Elena had always been obsessively protective of family reputation, even as children. When we were teenagers, Maria said on the witness stand, tears streaming down her face, Elena once threatened a boy who was spreading rumors about me. Not just threatened, she actually put crushed glass in his bicycle tires. He crashed and needed 20 stitches. Elena was 14 years old. The defense tried to argue that Elena's actions were the result of grief and confusion following her husband's death the previous year. But the prosecution's timeline showed that Elena had been planning something like this long before David's affair became apparent to her. She was waiting for an excuse, District Attorney Michael Chun said during closing arguments. The affair just gave her the justification she'd been looking for. Thomas Morrison was convicted on 14 counts of embezzlement and money laundering. He's serving 12 years in federal prison. The city recovered most of the stolen funds, but the real cost, 3 destroyed families, 2 dead, 1 woman in prison for life, could never be calculated. During Morrison's trial, I learned even more disturbing details about what had been happening in my family. Rebecca had discovered Thomas's financial crimes entirely by accident while looking for tax documents in his home office. Instead of confronting him, she'd panicked and run. Rebecca was terrified, Thomas's defense attorney revealed. She knew her husband was capable of violence. She'd seen him hurt people before. The affair with David had started as a desperate need for protection and help. Rebecca had approached David because she knew he understood financial records, could help her make sense of what she'd discovered. The romantic relationship had developed later, born from shared fear and the intense stress of gathering evidence against Thomas. They were both in over their heads, Agent Wells told me after Thomas's sentencing. Your husband wasn't a bad man, Mrs. Chun. He was trying to help his sister-in-law expose serious crimes. The affair was complicated, but his intentions weren't entirely selfish. This revelation didn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it did help me understand that David's final note had been genuine. He had been scared, and he had loved me, even while making choices that would destroy our marriage. I sold the house, dissolved the business, and moved across the country. I couldn't stay in Portland, couldn't walk those streets where David had lived his double life, where Rebecca had hidden from her crimes, where my mother had planned murder with the same careful attention she'd once used to plan family dinners. The move to Charleston wasn't easy. Everything reminded me of what I'd lost, not just David and Rebecca, but the entire version of reality I'd been living in. The woman I'd been, trusting, naive, focused on building a stable life, felt like a stranger to me now. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Amanda Foster, who specialized in family trauma. It was Dr. Foster who helped me understand something crucial about my mother's psychology. Your mother didn't just kill David and Rebecca, she explained during one of our sessions. She killed the version of your family that didn't meet her standards. In her mind, she was performing surgery, cutting out the diseased parts to save the healthy whole. It took months of therapy to realize that I'd been exhibiting signs of what Dr. Foster called hypervigilance, constantly scanning my environment for signs of deception or threat. I couldn't trust anyone completely, couldn't relax into relationships, couldn't stop analyzing every conversation for hidden meanings. Your mother betrayed your trust so fundamentally, Dr. Foster said, that your brain is now programmed to expect betrayal from everyone. The healing process led me to some unexpected discoveries. While sorting through David's belongings, I found a journal he'd kept during the final weeks of his life. The entries revealed a man tormented by guilt and fear, someone who'd gotten involved in something far beyond his understanding. But it was what I found hidden beneath his journal that truly shook me to my core. A small, leather portfolio containing documents I'd never seen before. Insurance policies, bank statements, and a will, all recent, all dated within the past 2 months. David had increased his life insurance policy to $2 million just 6 weeks before his death. He'd also opened a separate bank account that I knew nothing about, one where he'd been depositing money for months. The balance was $847,000. At first, I thought this was part of the embezzlement scheme. But when I brought the documents to Agent Wells, she explained something that made my blood run cold. This isn't stolen money, Mrs. Chun. These deposits match payments from several of David's legitimate clients. He was moving money into a separate account, and look at this. She pointed to a beneficiary form. This account was set up as a trust fund. For a child, my hands trembled as I read the paperwork. David had established a trust fund for Sarah Chen's future children with specific instructions that the money could only be accessed after his death. He knew, I whispered. He knew someone was going to kill him. Agent Wells nodded grimly. Your husband was preparing for his death, Mrs. Chun. He was making sure you'd be financially secure if something happened to him. But there was more. Hidden in the portfolio was a sealed envelope with my name on it, in David's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 days before his death. Sarah, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. I know someone is planning to hurt Rebecca and me. I've seen the signs, someone following us, strange phone calls, threats. At first I thought it was Thomas, but now I'm not sure. The threats feel personal, like someone who knows us intimately. I can't go to the police because I'm guilty too. The affair, the lies, the deception. I deserve whatever punishment comes. But Rebecca doesn't deserve to die for falling in love with the wrong man, and you don't deserve to be left with nothing because of my mistakes. The money in the trust fund is clean, I promise you that. It's payment from clients, money I've been saving for our future children. Now it's for whatever future you choose to build without me. There's something else you need to know. Rebecca is pregnant. 3 months. The baby might be mine. We don't know for certain, but the timing is right. If she dies, and if the baby somehow survives, please don't let Thomas raise that child. Please. I love you, Sarah. I've loved you through all of this, even when I was betraying that love every day. I hope someday you can forgive me, not for my sake, but for your own peace. David. I dropped the letter with shaking hands. Rebecca had been pregnant when she died. Elena hadn't just killed 2 adults. She killed an unborn child. The medical examiner's report, which I requested after finding David's letter, confirmed it. Rebecca Morrison had been approximately 12 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. The autopsy had noted it, but since she wasn't my sister by blood and I wasn't her next of kin, no one had felt obligated to inform me. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked Agent Wells when I called her, sobbing. The pregnancy wasn't considered relevant to the murder charges, she said quietly. Elena was already facing 2 counts of first-degree murder. Adding the death of an unborn child wouldn't have changed her sentence. But it changed everything for me. Elena hadn't just destroyed my marriage and my family. She'd ended a life that had never had a chance to begin. I never meant for it to go this far. He'd written just 5 days before his death. Rebecca came to me desperate, scared. Thomas had threatened her before. I thought I was helping her, but now I think I'm in love with her, and I don't know how to tell Sarah without destroying everything. Another entry, dated 3 days later. Elena suspects something. She's been asking strange questions about my work schedule, about Rebecca's absence from family dinners. Sarah doesn't see it, but her mother is watching us. I feel like prey. David had been aware that Elena was suspicious, but he'd underestimated how far she was willing to go. In his final entry, written the morning of his death, he'd made a decision. I'm going to tell Sarah everything tonight. The affair, the money laundering evidence, Thomas's threats, all of it. She deserves to know the truth, and I deserve whatever consequences come from that. Rebecca and I will face Thomas together, turn over the evidence to the FBI, and let the chips fall where they may. I can't live with these lies anymore. He planned to confess everything that Tuesday night. Instead, he'd received Elena's call and driven to his death. The journal also revealed something else. David had been receiving threatening messages for weeks. Not from Thomas Morrison, as I'd initially assumed, but from an unknown number that I now realize must have been Elena's burner phone. Stop what you're doing, or Sarah will learn the truth in the worst possible way. Family honor is more important than your selfish desires. You have 48 hours to end this, or I will end it for you. My mother had been terrorizing David for weeks before she killed him, using his love for me as a weapon against him. It's been 8 months now, and I'm still trying to understand how I missed it all. The signs were there. David's behavior, Rebecca's sudden absence, my mother's strange questions and mood changes. But I was so focused on living my normal, safe, predictable life that I never saw the darkness growing in my own home. I've started a new job here in Charleston, working as a freelance forensic accountant. The irony isn't lost on me. I now help investigate the kind of financial crimes that David died trying to expose. In a strange way, it feels like continuing his work, honoring the better parts of who he was. Last month, I received a letter from Elena. The prison had screened it, but they allowed it to be delivered. In careful handwriting, she'd written, Sarah, I hope you understand now that everything I did was to protect you. You're free to build the life you deserve, without the shame of David's betrayal or Rebecca's weakness. I regret that you had to witness the unpleasantness, but some things are more important than temporary comfort. Family honor endures forever. Love, Mother. I burned the letter without finishing it. Some truths are too poisonous to fully absorb, but the story doesn't end there. 3 months after Elena's conviction, I received a call from Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a genetic counselor at Oregon Health Sciences University. Mrs. Chen, I hope you don't mind me contacting you directly, but we've been working with some evidence from your family's case, and we've discovered something that I believe you need to know. The FBI had preserved DNA samples from the crime scene, including fetal tissue from Rebecca's pregnancy. As part of the investigation, they'd run paternity tests to determine if David was the father of Rebecca's unborn child. The results are conclusive, Dr. Martinez said gently. David Chen was not the biological father of Rebecca Morrison's baby. I felt the world shift beneath my feet again. If David wasn't the father, then who was? We compared the fetal DNA with all available samples from the case. Dr. Martinez continued. The biological father was Thomas Morrison, Rebecca's own husband. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca hadn't been having an affair with David because she'd fallen in love with him. She'd been having an affair because she was pregnant with her abusive husband's child and desperately needed help escaping. The conception date places the pregnancy at approximately 2 weeks before Rebecca first contacted David for help, Dr. Martinez explained. She was already pregnant when the affair began. She was running from more than just financial crimes, Mrs. Chen. She was running from a husband who had impregnated her and then threatened her life when she tried to leave him. This revelation recontextualized everything I thought I knew about the affair. Rebecca hadn't seduced my husband away from me. She turned to him as a lifeline, a way to escape an abusive marriage while protecting her unborn child. David's journal entries from that period, which I reread with this new information, told a different story. He hadn't fallen in love with Rebecca and then decided to help her expose Thomas's crimes. He'd been helping her first, and the emotional connection had developed from her vulnerability and his desire to protect her. Rebecca showed me the bruises today, he'd written in an entry I'd initially skipped over. On her arms, her back. Thomas has been hurting her for months. She's terrified of him, especially now that she's pregnant. She says he told her he'd kill her if she tried to leave with his child. I can't let her go through this alone. Another entry, dated a week later. I understand now why Rebecca can't go to the police. Thomas has connections throughout the city government. He's convinced her that no one would believe her, that he'd find a way to take the baby and destroy her credibly. She's not just afraid of him, she's afraid of the entire system he represents. The affair hadn't been about passion or betrayal of our marriage. It had been about David trying to save a pregnant woman and her unborn child from an abusive husband with the power to destroy them both. But Elena had seen only the surface, the secret meetings, the lies, the apparent betrayal. She'd never investigated deeper, never tried to understand the true circumstances. In her mind, David and Rebecca were simply adulterers who deserved death for their moral crimes. "Your mother killed 3 innocent people," Dr. Martinez said quietly. "A man who was trying to help, a woman who was trying to escape abuse, and an unborn child who never had a chance." After that phone call, I made a decision that surprised even me. I reached out to Thomas Morrison's defense attorney and provided them with the new DNA evidence and David's journal entries. Not to help Thomas avoid punishment for his financial crimes, but to ensure that the full truth about Rebecca's death was part of the legal record. Thomas Morrison's sentence was eventually extended to include charges related to domestic violence and spousal abuse. The evidence David and Rebecca had gathered about his financial crimes was just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators found a pattern of abuse and intimidation that stretched back years. Rebecca Morrison was a victim long before she met your husband, Detective Rodriguez told me during a follow-up interview. David Chun died, trying to save her from a man who would have eventually killed her anyway. The revelation about Rebecca's pregnancy and Thomas's paternity also explained something else that had been bothering me. In David's final note, he'd mentioned that he and Rebecca were planning to face Thomas together and turn over the evidence to the FBI. They weren't planning to run away together, as Elena had believed. They were planning to take down Thomas Morrison and then help Rebecca start a new life as a single mother, free from abuse. David had been willing to confess everything to me, the affair, the lies, the complicated circumstances that had led to his involvement with Rebecca. He'd been preparing to ask for my forgiveness and help Rebecca find safety. Instead, Elena had murdered all 3 of them based on her own twisted assumptions about family honor and moral purity. The strangest part is that my mother was right about one thing: I am free now. Free from a marriage built on lies. Free from a sister who'd chosen betrayal over honesty. Free from the illusion that I knew the people closest to me. But freedom earned through murder isn't really freedom at all. It's just another kind of prison. The most difficult part of my healing journey has been learning to live with the complexity of truth. David wasn't the villain Elena painted him as, but he wasn't entirely innocent either. He'd lied to me for months, made choices that would have ended our marriage even if he'd lived to confess them. Rebecca wasn't the homewrecker Elena believed her to be, but she had participated in an affair that deeply wounded me, even if her motivations were more complex than simple betrayal. And Elena wasn't the loving mother who killed to protect family honor. She was a calculating murderer who destroyed 3 lives based on her own rigid moral code and complete inability to understand nuance or complexity. The truth, I've learned, is rarely as simple as we want it to be. 6 months ago, I started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter here in Charleston. It's my way of honoring Rebecca's memory, helping other women escape the kind of situation she was trapped in, providing the support system she never had. One of the women I work with, Maria, reminds me of Rebecca in some ways. Young, pregnant, terrified of her husband's connections and power. When she tells me she doesn't know who to trust, that everyone seems to be on her husband's side, I understand exactly what Rebecca must have felt when she turned to David for help. The hardest part, Maria told me last week, is that everyone thinks they understand your situation, but they only see the surface. They don't see the threats, the fear, the impossible choices you have to make just to survive. It's through this work that I've finally begun to understand David's actions. He saw a woman in desperate need of help and he helped her, even though it meant compromising his own marriage and moral standards. The affair was wrong, but the impulse to protect someone vulnerable was fundamentally decent. Elena never understood this complexity. In her black-and-white worldview, adultery was a sin punishable by death, regardless of circumstances. She never asked why Rebecca had turned to David, never investigated the abuse, never considered that sometimes good people make bad choices for complicated reasons. Last week, I received another letter from Elena. This time, I read it all the way through. Sarah, I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I realize you may be angry with me for protecting you from David's betrayal. But you must understand that family reputation is everything. Your father and I built a good name in this community, and David was destroying it with his selfish actions. I've heard that you're working with troubled women in Charleston. I hope you're not being fooled by their sob stories. Women like Rebecca always claim their victims when they're caught in adultery. Don't let their lies poison your mind against the truth. I did what any good mother would do. I protected my daughter from humiliation and shame. Someday, when you have children of your own, you'll understand. Your loving mother. I kept that letter, not because I agreed with it, but because it perfectly captures Elena's complete inability to acknowledge the horror of what she'd done. Even now, serving life in prison, she sees herself as a hero who saved family honor. The letter also revealed something else. Elena had been monitoring my activities somehow, learning about my volunteer work at the domestic violence shelter. The thought that she might still be trying to influence my life from prison was terrifying enough that I contacted the authorities. It turned out Elena had been writing letters to several family members and friends, asking them to keep an eye on Sarah and report back on my activities. Most people had ignored her requests, but a few distant relatives had been providing her with updates about my life. She's trying to maintain control, Dr. Foster explained during our session. Even from prison, she wants to influence your choices and validate her own actions by monitoring your life. We worked together to establish boundaries. No more information about my activities would be shared with Elena, no more letters would be read, no more attempts at contact would be acknowledged. It was during this process that I realized something important about my own healing. I'd been so focused on understanding David's choices, Rebecca's situation, and Elena's motivations that I'd barely considered my own feelings about everything that had happened. The truth is, I'm angry. Furious, actually. Not just at Elena for the murders, or at David for the affair, but at the entire situation that put me in this position. I'm angry that Rebecca felt she had no choice but to turn to my husband for help instead of trusting me, her sister-in-law, with the truth about her abuse. I'm angry that David felt he had to lie to me about helping her, instead of trusting that I would have supported his efforts to protect a vulnerable woman. I'm angry that Thomas Morrison's abuse and crimes created the circumstances that led to all of this death and destruction. And I'm angry that Elena's twisted sense of moral superiority destroyed any chance for healing, forgiveness, or redemption. But mostly, I'm angry that I spent the first 34 years of my life believing that love and family were simple, straightforward things. That people were either good or bad, that marriages were either happy or broken, that mothers protected their children instead of destroying them. The world is so much more complicated than that, and nobody prepared me for the gray areas where love and betrayal coexist, where protection and control blur together, where good intentions lead to terrible consequences. If you found this story as shocking as I did living through it, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life mysteries. Sometimes the most important truth is that there are no simple truths, only complex human beings making impossible choices in desperate circumstances. And remember, the people we think we know best are often the ones capable of surprising us the most, for better or for worse.